Why does it seem like the masses are voting against their own financial interests, even when the math of inevitable fiat money debasement is right in front of them? In this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I'm joined by Bram Quittem to explore his research on Bitcoiner personality types and the hard truths of human evolution. We explore why about 50% of all Bitcoiners share the same personality type and what this means for the next phase of global adoption. And stick around to hear why we think that the pioneer phase is over and what that actually means for building a decentralized force to navigate the complex techno-society of the future. If you're enjoying my content, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel and like my video to support my journey. Thanks a lot. Now let's dive into this episode. Right, Brandon Quittem, welcome back to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Thanks for having me, Bram. Looking forward to it.
Likewise, yeah. This I don't know when you were back on before, but it is definitely almost 2 years ago or something. So I'm happy you are back. You recently published an updated report on your Bitcoin personality types, right? Like the Myers-Briggs, and I thought it would be interesting to discuss this together, right? I just showed you off cam, but I have my undercover Bitcoin hat, right? So it's like an insider joke, and I kind of want to take our time today to kind of go a little bit more meta. Like, can we kind of like zoom out and maybe explore, if Bitcoin is actually a universal tool for everyone, or maybe we're accidentally kind of like filtering for a specific type of people and missing, a bigger part of the population in the way that we, talk about the philosophy and the underlying thesis, etc. So if you're up for that, then let's do it.
Yeah, all about it. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah. So maybe a short Myers-Briggs primer, because I know that, some people say like, oh, this is BS. Other people love it. I just think it is a nice way to approach a certain type of personality type, right? If I read, INTJ or INTP, I very much identify with it. I think, although the head is INTJ, I'm probably more an INTP, right? This is not 100%, conclusion or whatever, but it's more a direction as to, how someone is wired. So I just wrote down a short primer for the people that don't know, right? So the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, is a popular personality assessment designed to identify how a person perceives the world, processes information, and makes decisions. It assigns individuals a specific 4-letter code based on the 4 spectrums of psychological preferences, right? So, you did this research. We'll put some images on the screen for the people watching. But you found something, right? You saw that 71% of the Bitcoin community shared the same psychological footprint, which is the analyst. Do you feel like we've discovered kind of like a tribe, or do you feel like we've discovered perhaps a limitation?
Yeah, good question. So let me deconstruct Myers-Briggs first, so the caveats are out of the way. It is one of many personality types. There's plenty of critiques around it. Some people say it's not very good. It's widely adopted in corporate America. There was a phase where like half the cubicles in America had your Myers-Briggs on the outside of your cubicle, so the employees could learn how to work with each other. Cool. But let's just say I'm not gonna defend Myers-Briggs as like the right way to evaluate personalities. But what I will defend is, after surveying about 1,500 Bitcoiners, the signal was so strong that there's clearly something here differentiating the general population from Bitcoin. Right. I think the easy one is INTJ and INTP, which in the surveys I've done account for about 57% of Bitcoiners. And if you compare that to the general population, you would expect around 5% of the general population to have both of those two. And so 10x overrepresented in only 2 of the Myers-Briggs personality types means something. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have what they define as the sentinel group, which is like late adopters. They don't like taking risks. They're not comfortable going against the grain. They want Bitcoin to be boring, right? And it's roughly the inverse there, where it's around 50% of general populations in that category, and it's like 2% of Bitcoiners. And so, yeah, that's the quick analysis is we're nothing like Gen Pop, and it appears more like Bitcoiners are systems thinkers, forward looking, comfortable going against the grain, high risk, things like that, which also maps to early adopters of any technology, right? So I think your question was like, are we in a weird spot with adoption right now? And I think we really are. I think up until this point, the Bitcoin community, if we want to call it that, is made up of that same archetype of early adopters. And in order to communicate with those people, you can talk about how money printing is bad and how Bitcoin is a new form of money and this new form of money is better for you. And the early adopter types eat that up. But the second half of that adoption curve is terrified of those ideas. And so I think there's two ways to look at it. One, the Bitcoin community needs to do a better job communicating what Bitcoin is to the more normie population. That's one angle. The other angle is Bitcoin itself needs to mature beyond a certain point to where those late adopters aren't threatened by it. You know, if Bitcoin is sold everywhere, it's part of your company's 401k match, it's just embedded in society, then all of a sudden the defenses go down and those late adopter folks can buy some Bitcoin. And so I think we're right at that point. I think it was Gartner Hype Cycles has a similar bell curve, and they talk about like the chasm. And it's essentially the hardest part of an adoption curve is going from those early adopters to the early majority. And to me, that's exactly where we are in Bitcoin. I think you could point to the fact that the 2024-2025 cycle that we just finished here did not bring in new retail like any previous cycle did. And it's certainly not an awareness issue, right? I would say from 2017 on, especially during the COVID era, everyone heard about Bitcoin. It's on TV every day. Everyone knows a Bitcoin friend in their life. And yet still, we didn't see new folks coming in. So that's thesis one, like, personality types crossing the chasm. We're in the tricky stage. The other side is, I think the economic condition for the average individual, I'll speak on the US, I assume it's the same in Europe. The average American does not have investable income. And so at the end of the month, if you're struggling to pay your bills, you're not looking to invest. You can't invest, let alone have time to learn about this new monetary technology. And so I think it's a little bit of both. And so I think most of the adoption, quote unquote, that we've seen the last couple of years has been corporate adoption or something approaching the financialization of the Bitcoin asset. And obviously those groups have more disposable or investable income. And so I think that all ties in.
If something happened to you tomorrow, could your family access your Bitcoin? Not probably, not they'd figure it out, but with certainty. I've thought about this a lot. Whatever custody solution you are using, inheritance is the piece most people haven't solved yet. Billions in Bitcoin have already been lost because someone died without a plan. With OnRamp, inheritance planning is built directly into your custody setup. Your Bitcoin stays segregated and in your control, secured across independent institutions in multiple jurisdictions, insured through Lloyd's of London, and accessible to the people you choose when they need it. And it doesn't matter where in the world you or they are. You can book a free consultation to learn more at onrampbitcoin.com/Bram. That's onrampbitcoin.com/Bram. Most people stop too early with Bitcoin. They buy it, maybe move it to a wallet and think they are done. But they're not. The real questions are how you're securing it, how private your setup is, and whether you're verifying your own transactions or trusting someone else. And what happens to your Bitcoin when something happens to you? This is the layer that most people ignore, and it's the most important one. That's why I've been working with the Bitcoin Way to help you set up self-custody properly, including privacy, cybersecurity, inheritance, and even running your own node. And they do it without ever touching your Bitcoin. They're not a custodian. They're your support team. If you're serious about this like I am, go to thebitcoinway.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to book a free call. They'll walk you through your setup, personalize everything to you, and help you get a much stronger position very quickly, whether you're a beginner or more advanced. That's thebitcoinway.com/Bram. You did that research. Again, we'll put it on screen, right? But the biggest group is INTJ and INTP. And I've said this before as well. Like, I also think we are very lucky with how we're wired, right? Like, I think our kind of like personality types have the ability, apparently, to kind of also project toward the future, right? A certain circumstance toward the future, or extrapolate a possible problem or probability or scenario toward the future, and then kind of translate it back to today, and then, have a way to kind of like judge the probability of said scenario in the future, and then make a decision on like, should I take action today or not? And so one of my conclusions has also been that a lot of people just find it very hard to either visualize that, or are, I don't want to say interested enough, but probably like triggered enough or something to actually care about the possible scenario in the future, right? And so the INTJ, which is the architect, and INTP, which is the logician, they share, INT, and that means they have very similar underlying temperaments, right? So they are rational, logical, they're introverted, they have a need for autonomy, right? So I think, once you realize that the money is centrally controlled by people no better than you, right? But not aligned with, whatever you're aligned with your individual life, then I think that kind of already triggers this autonomy part, right? And also kind of like the intellectual curiosity is also a big part of that, right? Because if you, come across the first thing and then are like, this is not something I want, then we're also curious enough to actually try or attempt to figure out, okay, then what is actually going on, right? What kind of information do I need to actually make some type of action? And you just mentioned the Sentinels, right? And I also wrote that, looked that up. It said Sentinels represent the temperament group characterized by practicality, reliability, and a strong sense of duty. They value stability, structure, and tradition, making them the grounded foundation of most organizations and families, right? And as you said, you saw that 46% of people, that's the Sentinel majority, right? They haven't yet gotten to Bitcoin. And I agree with you that, if you don't have any money to actually save, right? Or you don't have time and space to actually think and reflect, right? Those are the biggest issues I would agree with, right? But like, what is something that we could actually do? Is there something we could actually do, you think? Or maybe they're just not there yet in terms of external circumstances, right? Like whatever we are projecting toward the future, bond crisis, whatever, fiat monetary debasement, stuff like that. Maybe it actually has to happen for them to take notice. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's hard. You and I can't do anything about the macroeconomic conditions. So I think we just leave that one alone and assume it has some weight. I think what the Bitcoin community can do a better job of is to communicate the benefits of Bitcoin in a way that represents the needs of those laggard groups, right? I think to illustrate it personally, my favorite part of being in Bitcoin was like 2018 to 2021, maybe. And the content was philosophical, where we feel like we're coming up with new ideas. We're very abstract. We're very future oriented, very exciting from my perspective. But if you share that type of content with a normal person, it offends all their sensibilities. And so I think the Bitcoin community that I resonate most with has a very hard time communicating across those lines. We're just talking to each other. And so if we want to change that, we either need to attract newer Bitcoin community members who then go communicate it a little bit more watered down, a little bit more sterile to the next wave of adopters, or we have to convince ourselves to get out of our own way and start doing that communication ourselves. And the way you'd want to think about that is we're not overthrowing the central banking regime. We're not stealing fire from the gods. Okay. Bitcoin's here to stay. It should be a part of a well-balanced portfolio, and it makes your family's financial health better. It actually de-risks your family financially going forward. And so that would be kind of the shift. And I think we're pretty close to that point. I don't think the mass consciousness has accepted this yet, but the Bitcoin ETFs were obviously a huge success. They're everywhere. Our former adversaries on Wall Street are now promoting Bitcoin every chance they get. All the banks bend the knee one by one. And I think the Trump administration has done a lot attempt to normalize Bitcoin. But at the same time, the family's grifting so hard that I think a lot of people who started anti-Trump, they're not going to change their mind because Trump says strategic Bitcoin reserve. They're going to see all the shit coining and the Trump coin, the Melania coin, and all these scams. And so, yeah, I think we're nearing towards that point from a macro condition, but it takes a while to filter down to the masses. And I think that is where the Bitcoin community can step up. And so I would say in the last couple of years, just like looking at the attendance of Bitcoin conferences, the revolutionary energy is watered down in a huge way compared to when I first started getting involved. And so in many ways, I think the community naturally already is trending down that adoption curve. But again, if you're here to do your tour of duty and you want to help, look up, just put the Sentinels in your Claude, come up with marketing plans, going after the Sentinels and do what you can do there.
Do you think that there's also, despite being wired in a certain way, we also, all of us, right, kind of like lack this fundamental intuition of like a trustless system, right? We're kind of like programmed by central authority for so long that it is just really hard to even fantasize or visualize that something else is also possible and that there are certain benefits and also risks and whatever, right, to that. But I feel like a lot of people aren't even able to make a certain comparison just because their mind is just kind of like capped.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like when I think about what is the core of the problem, like if we get to the heart of what's going on in mass communication and why people are so, it seems like people are voting against their own interests in such a large way. And I think the core of the problem is that we are biological creatures that evolved to live in a small kin group of 100, 150 people, often called Dunbar's number. All of our hopes, wishes, dreams, desires, fears, all of our hardware is forged in that period. And then we fast forward thousands of years later and culture grows exponentially and our biology can't keep up. And so we're hunter-gatherers living in a futuristic techno society and we can't quite figure out how to make that work. And so I think the outsource the thinking thing is very real. And that feels like a defense mechanism to try to survive and not go crazy in an overly complex world relative to our biology. And so, yeah, we outsource our thinking to our political team, to the influencers we follow, anyone we believe has the answers. And that feels good to us, even if we're being led off a cliff. The psychological burden is reduced, so we do it anyways. And that also brings up the point that if you are a sophisticated actor in today's world, a state or someone else with lots of power, deep state, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of incentive and a lot of capacity to manipulate the masses because we all live in our little information bubbles and combining lots of data and targeted messaging. And then this pointed out human weakness, living in a complex world. It's very easy to manipulate the masses into thinking certain things. And you can point to like mass psychosis type events we've experienced in the last few years. And I think technology plays a huge role in that. And so when we go back to that pendulum, are we swinging back towards decentralization? I don't think we're there yet. In my opinion, agricultural society is decentralized by nature. Everyone has a plot of land. All your food and commodities are local by design. Then you industrialize. Okay, now we need more people. We centralize capital. We create more stuff. People move to cities. That's centralizing. After World War II, we move into the Bretton Woods system, eventually come off the gold standard entirely in a fiat system. That's centralizing. And I think the information age had promises of decentralization, in the sense that, okay, we're on the internet, it's a free flow of information, and technically the internet could be architected that way. However, we essentially gave up the decentralized principles of the internet for some vague sense of convenience, living in the walled gardens of the Mag 7, essentially. And so the next phase, in my opinion, here is AI, which it could become the most centralizing force in history of technology. And we could all live under this like techno-communist super state ruled by AI everywhere. that is a risk we're about to face here. And so to me, that will be the final boss on the pendulum of decentralization versus centralization. And we were talking earlier, obviously Bitcoin represents a decentralizing force. And so it feels like a race between Bitcoin capturing the consciousness versus this AI techno state being set up. And it does feel like the pieces are being put in place for that AI techno state. And I think if nothing big happens, we're going to sleepwalk right into that. And so I think from a, preserving the spark of freedom or markets or individualism or whatever we want to call that counterforce, now is a potent time to take that seriously. It really matters right now. The forces are shifting around. We can talk about the fourth turning. We can talk about geopolitics. We can talk about new technology, whatever. But we're setting up the battle lines right now for the big one, the biggest change in our lifetimes by far. And so, yeah, I guess my thought here is we need to take it very seriously. And we need as many people as possible to have enough conscious awareness of what's going on to participate. And with economics making that hard, people are time poor, the deck's stacked against us. But I think Bitcoin is properly understood. Bitcoin is a radical idea that captures the imagination of people. And you don't see many people who fall in love with Bitcoin all of a sudden change their mind. Mm-hmm. And so it does feel like a slow, steady one-way street towards the Bitcoin side of the house. And maybe we're just slowed down right now with that crossing the chasm period. Yeah.
In this article, you talk about, we're the pioneer species, right? We took the earliest action, actually. And I really love that idea, by the way, right? Because, if you think about how many random ideas are released on the internet every day, it's pretty crazy that, something that was released 17 years ago is still relevant today and actually, grew to the level of where Bitcoin is at. So, even if you hate it, you cannot, dismiss that there is apparently some merit to it, right? And so now we're seeing Wall Street, governments move in. And so I'm kind of wondering what you think about this, right? Like, so if we're the pioneer species, do we get to decide, in your analogy, how the forest grows? Or do we just lay the base layer and then kind of like move on, as actual mycelium does, right, in a forest?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much here. So I'm going to start with the end and then I'll go back to the fungi stuff. So I think that Bitcoin had its genetics, its DNA produced by Satoshi, released into the world. The early community shepherded it. But honestly, Bitcoin hasn't changed much since it was released. Very minor tweaks along the way. And so I think that early community shepherded it to get it big enough to where it's hard to kill. Bitcoin Sign Guy had a line I loved a long time ago, which is the Bitcoin community is just providing cover fire so that Bitcoin can get through the door. And I think that's true. So the early days, we shepherd it, make sure it doesn't die, get the right people involved. But at a certain point, and I would argue that point is behind us now, Bitcoin is out of our control. We individually cannot do anything about it. No government can do anything about it. It doesn't matter what we want to do. This thing's out there. It has its own hopes, wishes, dreams, desires. It interacts with the world. It learns, it evolves, and it's far larger and more complex than any of us. And so I think that's as far as we can take it as individuals. Now, doesn't mean we just allow history to unfold. Like, we can still on the margin affect that adoption curve. We can on the margin make life for Bitcoiners easy. But I think its destiny is already out there as a system. Now, going back to fungi, this article, etc. So I wrote the first part of this article in 2018. I got into Bitcoin in 2017, did some shitcoining, thought I was a genius, made a bunch of money, pretty much lost it all in 2018. And then I hit the books, taught myself economics from the ground up through an Austrian lens. In university, I was steeped in Keynesianism. So I sort of had to relearn and put Bitcoin in proper context. Out of that exploration, I realized Bitcoin was the thing, not the shitcoins. Okay, then I kept coming back to, well, if Bitcoin is what I think it is, won't the governments, the powers that be, just shut it down once it gets a certain size? And I wrestled with that for months. I was living in Bali at the time. I went to a Bitcoin meetup, and some guy there had a picture of the Lightning Network, very early days, and he was showing all the nodes and the connections of this early Lightning graph. And what I saw was, hey, that looks like a mycelial network. And all of a sudden, the pieces started coming together in my head. I went home that day, back to the villa, take the little scooter home, scribbling on pieces of paper, and I eventually wrote most of what was the first part of that Mycelium of Money series, posted it later in 2018. And out of that exploration, comparing it to the biological world, I actually gained confidence that Bitcoin would be very hard to stop due to its fundamental architecture. And now I'll explain what that is. But first, Fungi 101. People generally think about, when they think about fungi, they think about like button mushrooms they buy at the grocery store. They think about the red emoji mushroom, the Mario mushroom, and they think about psilocybin mushrooms. All those things are fascinating. However, fungi is an entire kingdom, just like we have plants, animals, fungi, etc. And there's more biodiversity in fungi than plants and animals combined. So hundreds of thousands of species that we know of. And only like 10% of fungal organisms produce the mushrooms that we think about. The kingdom also includes yeast, saffrodes, mycorrhizae fungi, gourmet mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, medicine, all these different things. If you like beer, wine, cheese, chocolate, bread, all these things are only possible because fungi do some chemistry that produce those things that we like. Most of our medicine comes from fungi. The oldest multicellular life on our planet was fungi. They've survived all the great mass extinction events, roughly 5 of those. The largest organism in the world is a honey mushroom. It's thousands of years old and thousands of acres large. It's consuming an entire forest in eastern Oregon.
The fungi had their final form 700 million years before people. Huh? That's so crazy. Yeah,
exactly. And even though this is so fascinating, it's a forgotten kingdom. In fact, mycology, the study of fungi, was only introduced into the university setting in like the 70s. Before that, fungi were just lumped into the botany department. Okay, just to illustrate how far behind we are. And so there's endless future discoveries, medicines, etc., coming from fungi that we haven't even scratched the surface yet. In fact, a NASA group is trying to grow moon shelters out of mushrooms. So you can create a mold and train fungi to build industrial building materials out of mycelium. And you could do this on the moon. You could bring spores, which are microscopic, introduce water found on the moon, and grow moon bases. So anyways, that's the precursor. Fungi are amazing, and it's an equally deep rabbit hole. So go check it out. Now, bringing it back to, can Bitcoin be stopped? The primary form that a fungal organism takes is in the mycelial form. This is a one-cell walled root-like structure. You can think of it like underground tubes, pumps, pulleys, like an entire industrial system. It connects all the trees together. They trade resources. The fungal organisms demonstrate economic principles. And actually, it's a Dutch biologist I had on, Toby Keers. We've done some podcasts together. She's like borderline communist, admittedly. And when she was studying fungi, she was frustrated to find out that the fungi are market actors. They buy low, they sell high, they hoard resources, and they get a better price. And it is an underground economy. Mm-hmm. And this is just nuts. Okay, that network is a decentralized brain. There's no central processing unit. If you cut the mycelial mat in half, you now have 2. It sends information bidirectionally. It learns. So if there's an attacker on one side of the network, the fungal organism essentially tells the mushroom scientist to produce new custom enzymes, and they are the masters of chemistry, produce new molecules for that specific invader, ships them over there, takes care of the predator, and then now it has a new type of chemistry in its library of defense mechanisms for the future. And so this decentralized network intelligence, which is a very old archetype, it survives all these extinction events, which means that architecture is a biologically sound strategy. Okay, now bringing it back to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin network, properly understood, is very similar. It is like a decentralized network archetype. There are nodes, there are individuals, there's software, you add it all up, and it behaves like a biological system. Okay, if there's a software bug in the Bitcoin network, the information network around Bitcoin, which involves people, tells the software developers there's a bug. They create new software, which is kind of like a new enzyme or a new molecule, ships it around the network upgrades, and now that specific vulnerability is gone. So it does simulate learning in the same way. And there's no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no single computer where it lives. And so you cut the Bitcoin network in half and it just routes around it. And so it is sort of this anti-fragile system. And because the biological system that we described in Mycelium is so hard to stop, and Bitcoin shares a similar decentralized network archetype, that gave me the confidence that no matter what we try to do to this thing, it is too big to fail. It is very, very hard to shut down. And so that was kind of the last piece for me to be like, okay, this Bitcoin thing is for real, and it's here to stay. And so bringing it back to that, are we captured by the suits? I don't think so. I think what happens more likely is that individuals get captured by Bitcoin. And yeah, individuals work at banks who maybe are antagonistic to Bitcoin. However, the individuals are compelled to own it. And all of a sudden, the calculus on should you attack Bitcoin or should you adopt it comes into question. Mm-hmm. And historically, and I think we can be confident about this in the future, individuals and groups have more benefit to adopt it than to attack it. And on the margin, that matters dramatically. And so I think Bitcoin's here to stay. And I think a large part of that is because of that decentralized network archetype.
For my European friends that want to buy Bitcoin with ease, check out Relay. I've been a longtime fan and happy to partner up with what I think is the best Bitcoin-only platform for Europeans. They offer a super simple, beginner-friendly app with no distractions and no shitcoins. You can do a quick one-time smash buy or set up automatic purchases when you're stacking regularly. And here's the thing that matters most. Relay is 100% self-custody. Every set you hold is yours. Your keys, your coins. If you want to get started, download the app via my link below or in the description and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, at checkout to get 10% off your fees. Every Bitcoiner hits this moment. You need cash. Maybe a house deposit, an emergency, or a tax bill, and you're staring at your stack thinking, do I really want to sell this? Here's the thing, you don't have to. You can borrow against your Bitcoin instead, so there's also no taxable event and your stack can keep on stacking. This is where Firefish comes in, a peer-to-peer marketplace for Bitcoin-backed loans. And Firefish isn't a lender. They built the protocol that makes this all possible, which is exactly why they never, ever have to touch your Bitcoin. During your loan, your Bitcoin sits in an on-chain multisig secured by open source code. You can easily create a loan request with your desired amount, duration, and interest rate and share it on their marketplace at firefish.io. When you get matched and decide to accept a loan offer, you can use code BRAM to get 30% off your first loan's fees. That's firefish.io and code BRAM.
Dude, it is still so fascinating that apparently something that was made digitally has so many of the same principles as Mycelium, right? Like, and by the way, for anyone who wants to dive into this more, I loved Fantastic Fungi on Netflix, and you should listen to Paul Stamets on Rogan, for example. He's the world's best known mycologist, basically. He, for example, had an example of how in Japan they used Mycelium to find the most optimal way to structure the metro system in Tokyo or something. And so they had like a plain map of Tokyo with these nodes, and then the Mycelium went and actually made a better routing system, track, than what was actually already in place, right? So it finds kind of like this optimal state. And so when we translate that to also the tech of Bitcoin, you said, if you cut Bitcoin in half, the crazy, that, and by the way, also the whole adoption game theory, right? So two things, you can fork off Bitcoin, right? Like that. The whole point is that you can fork off Bitcoin. You can make Brandon coin, I can make Bram coin, whatever. But the OG idea, the idea that has the most adoption, it is this social consensus, right? And you see that currently the social consensus has converged on XYZ characteristics of what Bitcoin currently is, right? But if we fork off Brandon coin and we find the biggest social consensus, then it is Brandon coin that people adopt. But Brandon coin is not Bitcoin, right? So I think that's a very important thing. And like on the adoption part, as a plant, you can decide not to use Bitcoin, right? Or not to use Mycelium, but it doesn't really help you to grow, right? So I think it's very interesting that if you are a plant and other plants are using Mycelium and they are actually exchanging information, like you said, right? These trees are actually communicating with each other in terms of the resources, and like they can actually say, like, I've had enough resources, do you want some of mine? And that's how they actually communicate, which is just a wild idea. It's just so crazy that Bitcoin is similar in that in that degree. Did you know the Tokyo example? Like,
yeah. This is an amazing example. So the Tokyo system, it was actually a slime mold rather than mycelium, which used to be in the fungal kingdom. We learn now it's actually more like an amoeba, but the principle is the same. A slime mold is like a community of individual organisms that sort of acts as one little blob. If you go look in the forest and you see like yellow goo on some downed tree or something, that is the slime mold. And what's interesting here is they're trying to solve what's called the traveling salesman problem, which is like if you're a sales rep and you have to go to multiple stops, the more stops you have, it's like an exponential curve on how hard it is to find the optimal route. And so to give some numbers, if there's 5 cities, there's 24 possible routes between those cities. If there's 10 cities, so you doubled it, it goes up to 300,000 possible routes. Whoa. If there's 30 cities, it's 10 to the 30th. Okay, this is an enormous number, which essentially says there's no algorithm that humans have that can accurately come up with the optimal route. So humans designed Japanese Tokyo system. Then they put all the nodes in a petri dish, and they put oat flakes on the nodes, which is what the slime mold eats. Release the slime mold. Within 24 hours, it grew to find all the food. And then within like 12 hours after that, it re-architected its network to create the most optimal route to consume all that food. Yeah. Then you look at the map and you realize that the slime mold overcomes that traveling salesman problem that our computers cannot do today, because it pushes decision making to the edge. It's not one unit. It's a super organism of small units all making decisions in their local area. Yeah. And that is how you overcome that computation problem. And Bitcoin is the same. Markets are the same. Markets are individual actors making decisions in their local environment. The sum total of those individuals produces a price signal. It's the most information dense signal in the world. With Bitcoin, we decide what wallet to use, what exchange to use, when to buy, when to sell, when to communicate about, etc. Again, that sum total aggregate of individuals creates something that can solve problems in a way that no one could engineer. Right? And like a clock or a perfectly German engineered watch is precise, predictable. It's amazing engineering, but it is a complicated system. It's not a complex system. And mycelium, Bitcoin, this traveling salesman problem, markets, those are all examples of complex systems. And once you enter the realm of complex systems, our engineering doesn't take us there. And so we actually have to have our machines, our made things, they have to start to look like biological creations, because that is where the complexity comes from. And so I don't think it's a surprise that our technology as it becomes more advanced, starts to look like biology. And I don't think it's a surprise that our biology, as in humans, and our civilization begins to resemble something more like technology the further we go. And so I think both of those, technology and biology, are two sides of the same coin. Technology emerges out of the same fundamental forces that produce biology, produce evolution. And so I just think humans would be better served to have those lines a little bit more blurry in their head, because increased complexity, those things start to merge.
And I don't know if you saw that, but they found a mushroom in China and in the Philippines, I think. And they are the exact same species in different locations. And they, it's not Amanita muscaria, I think it's related, but it's called like Gulliver something, or like it's named after the island of Gulliver. And it makes you see little people. And it's like confirmed. It's like thousands of years, like it's thousands of years of stories around this. You should look this up. It's fascinating. You know, shit like Gulliver's Island, or just, you know, the whole idea of, you know, the fucking Smurfs and the you know, the little mushroom houses they live in. Like, maybe it's just true, right? Like, why would a weird story like that, you know, live through history? So yeah, you should. That's a new rabbit hole for you. I thought you would.
Enough right now. I haven't heard of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another location. I don't know in which country. And they're still checking if that's the same species, but they both have legends in that area around, you know, if you eat that, you see little people.
That is insane.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I feel strongly about the myths, the mythology, the tropes, the fairy tales. It's all the same thing. It's how do we preserve?
Real. It's real.
It is
like,
real. Yeah.
You know, in one of the oldest caves in France, you have or like the oldest murals, right? Like cave paintings.
Yep.
And like, what did they depict? Random shit, like made up stuff, or like stuff they actually saw, right? Like, yeah, stuff they actually saw. Like, it's a way for you to save, store, and send, you know, your observation to the future. And so, you know, if you then think about, you know, Chinese zodiac, there's 11 real animals, and then there's a fake one. The dragon is fake, because, you know, they lost their mind or whatever, right? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, if you want to propagate information toward the future, you package it in certain ways that people will keep on using it, so they're reminded of the fact that, you know, this information came from the past that needs to be transferred towards the future. Anyway, yeah, I think, you know, I think
it's an amazing topic. Like the Great Flood myth, it appears in hundreds of cultures. Essentially, all cultures that we studied
that shouldn't be connected, right?
Correct. All around the world, every continent, different time periods, they all share a Great Flood myth. Yeah, and you know, the naive person or the hard-headed person would say, well, we don't have evidence of that, so it can't be true. But that's insane. Like, there is
evidence. The story is the evidence.
The story is evidence. Exactly. And we should take that serious. Now, the other counterpoint is certain people would try to send information to the future literally, and other people would try to encode that information in symbolism where you can't necessarily understand the intention of the message sender unless you have some sort of key. And so that's, in a way, it's like cryptography obfuscating the reality. And so then the challenge becomes, as moderns, we have to decipher what is the true intention of those messages. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like, Hansel and Gretel tells you a story. Okay, kids don't get lost in the woods, but maybe Hansel and Gretel had a deeper meaning and we actually miss that meaning today. I don't know if that's a good example.
Yeah. I fully agree.
The folly is deciphering what's the intention. Same with our religions. Was that a literal message? Was that a metaphor? Were the lines blurred? It's hard to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that's a nice bridge. You know, you talk about Bitcoin being this organism, right? The essence of Bitcoin is, you know, numbers and letters. But how would you look at it in like the biological way? I found a word called endosymbiosis, right? Where something lives inside a bigger organism. Do you think it's something like that? Or maybe it's even temporary, right? We live in the TradFi organism for XYZ time, and then, you know, all the individuals basically figure out that they're better off just having Bitcoin.
Yeah, lots to think about on that one. So I would bring up, let's anchor with a type of fungal organism called a saprove. saprobe, which all it means is they digest and break down organic material. So let's say you're in a forest and you see leaves and sticks fall down and they land on the ground. What happens to those leaves and sticks? Right? Mushrooms and also bacteria, they digest those leaves, they break them down. They essentially break the chemical bonds. And when they break those chemical bonds, they release carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, etc. The building blocks of those organic material are liberated and then redistributed through the ecosystem. And I think Bitcoin plays a similar role when you look at fiat monetary system. Bitcoin comes in and it starts eating away at the certain weakest points of the fiat system, starts taking market share for certain things. Okay, maybe it's better for payments in this geography. Maybe it's better for savings and avoiding debasement in that area. I think it starts to eat away at information architectures or economic architectures, like a company, like a state, like an orthodoxy around economics, right? It just starts to decompose those weaker points. And I think another analogy here that's fun is with the miners. So people would say Bitcoin wastes energy or something like that. But what happens? Let's take aluminum smelting as a fun example here. Very high energy intensive process. Typically, we put aluminum smelting in the middle of nowhere. Let's say a remote geothermal spot in Iceland. Tons of energy production. There's no consumers of that energy anywhere nearby. So what do? They drop an aluminum plant right next to it. The Bitcoin miners, and then the aluminum plant just consumes the energy. Okay. That's essentially wasted energy otherwise until you enter the aluminum smelting, right? And Bitcoin miners are just consuming that stranded wasted energy in a more efficient way than anything we've ever found, in the same way that fungal organisms recycle and liberate those leaves and sticks and any other organic matter. And so those miners go seek out the energy arbitrage opportunities, these untapped resources that cannot be used. It finds a way to use those resources, which then improves the ecology or the economy around those certain areas. And yeah, obviously the second order effects of that symbiosis between miners and energy production leads to more energy production on net and more widely distributed energy production, which is ultimately good for humanity. Energy production is upstream of all the human civilizational stuff that makes our lives good. And so I think it's just important to understand that Bitcoin is mimicking a biological system here, and it does produce positive externalities in our civilization.
A lot of people also talk about, Bitcoin kind of lost this edgy pioneer spirit that kind of got us here, right? So I kind of want to talk about, what's left for us, like for the rebels or however you want to define it, right? Once the institutions have kind of or are participating in this thing. Does that make sense? Like, I wonder what you think about that. Like, I think it's a criticism that people use, but I don't think it's a fair one, because there are, by definition, not enough rebels or early adopters or innovators ever.
Yeah, I think we sort of hit the saturation point on the revolutionary energy and the type of INTP, INTJ thinkers that we have come to associate with the Bitcoin network. To me, we've passed that phase. And from an adoption standpoint, it might almost be necessary for the suits and the governments and the sailors of the world to sort of take the torch on marketing Bitcoin. And some would say that's a failure. We're going to lose Bitcoin if that's the case. I don't think that at all. I think that if Bitcoin is the best money ever, we should assume that at a certain point, the banks and the governments will realize this and they want to participate. And so to me, it's a sign of winning, even though I don't like the feeling. I think it's actually a sign of winning. And maybe there's nothing Bitcoiners could have done to attract those sentinels, because the sentinels don't want to hear our message. They want Bitcoin to be a part of their world without having to think about it. And so maybe we hit the maximum amount of individual adoption before the suits pump this thing up and people start buying it because they own a piece of the S&P 500 or they own whatever Bitcoin in their ETF. And so I think that's actually what's going on. And it's a little disheartening, but I don't think it's that big of a deal because, as you said earlier, we all had the opportunity to front run the banks. Not everyone did, but it's not realistic to assume that everyone would. And so I think that's where we are in the thing, and we should accept it. It doesn't mean we stop participating. We can still help on the margin. We should make self-custody as easy as possible for the people who want to go down that route. We should communicate it as easy as possible for those to understand. But you can't, whatever, lead a horse to water analogy, I think is very real here. And I think sadly, TradFi, governments, the sailors of the world, they're going to be leading the horses to water going forward here.
Yeah, and I also think it kind of takes time, right? Like this is kind of the Trojan horse type idea. I think we should, or I want to emphasize just for myself. I also think it's a pity the suits figured it out, right? Or at least to a degree. But although we say Bitcoin is for everyone, not everyone will adopt it like we adopted it, or even super cypherpunk people adopted it in the beginning, right? Like, I got into it in 2014. That was way beyond this initial, way riskier phase, where people bought a shit ton when it was like 50 cents or 30 cents or whatever, right? Like these people even had way bigger foresight. Or when you read, what the hell Finney talks about, like how Bitcoin gets to a 10 million valuation, etc. Like those are the true innovators and pioneers that could actually zoom out to a bigger picture and then go back down again to actually the technical thing, which is just very cool. But I think I agree, it always kind of works like this. But I would add the caveat that this is what Tuur de Meester told me once, like we are in a monetary war in a sense, right? Like centralized control over the money means there's centralized control over your literal, absolutely finite time and energy in your life and your psychological well-being and your idea of the future and all these things, right? And for me, the culmination of that is that, now there are people that don't want to have children because, they're so uncertain about the future, or they're super nihilistic, or, I could never afford that, etc. And so now we're at a point where, a man-made structure, a matrix, however you want to call it, is actually working against the biological urge and nature of people. And so I really view it as kind of a battle at that level. And I do think we should continue, having the edge or turning up the edge or whatever. Like it needs to be clear that although, you can participate and use Bitcoin in, these more traditional ways, TradFi, whatever, but that is not what is actually going to help you, in my opinion, right? Because if we tie it back to, the pendulum, the centralized forces, etc., the incentive for the centralized forces is to keep on being centralized forces, right? There's no one that's going to wake up in the morning and be like, I'm just going to give up my power. So I do feel that we have a very long battle to go still. What do you think?
Yeah, a couple of points here. So I think Bitcoin isn't for anyone, Bitcoin is for anyone, but it's not for everyone. Right. And I think that distinction matters here because not everyone is going to put in the reps to learn what this is, especially early on. And so although it's available to everyone, not everyone will participate. And that's okay. It's still the most free, most egalitarian, best opportunity for the little guy ever. And we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of the good here. It was a success in that way. One other comment you mentioned on Hal Finney in the early days, talking about Bitcoin banks and $10 million Bitcoin, whatever. The Think Boys on Twitter, myself included, would like to believe we come up with new ideas and new arguments and new ways to evaluate Bitcoin. However, pretty much every topic we've discussed since I've been in Bitcoin was already discussed in the first 3 years on the Bitcoin Talk Forum. And so I find that very humbling. And it makes the genesis of Bitcoin even more special because the group around Bitcoin at that time was special, and they birthed a technology that might just save humanity from a very dark path. And so that's amazing. We should be proud of that. Next one, monetary war, 100%. This is a monetary war. The fiat system empowers those who control the money printer and their allies. And it is nothing short of stealing time from people. And so we should take it serious. It should offend people deeply as soon as you understand the fiat system, which I think sparks much of the evangelism out of the community is, hey, we've been wronged for a long time. This is a systemic drain on our society. And we, as the larger group, should do something about it. And, stay humble, stack sats is plenty to do for the average individual. I think another part here is that the arrogance of the state played a huge role for us and gave an advantage to Bitcoin, because in the first 5 years of Bitcoin's life, it could have been shut down by a well-resourced state. I believe that. And maybe it wouldn't die entirely, but you could kick the can down the road 20 years to the point where it might never emerge properly. However, the state was way too arrogant about that. They never believed it could happen. And so they let it evolve in the underground for so long. And too many people are captured by it, too much technology written, that I don't think they can do anything about it now. It'd be so unpopular. And so I think that's just a win for Bitcoin, that the hubris of the state kind of bit him in the butt there. And then last point, you mentioned the matrix. So I saw a YouTube video recently of some dude evaluating the matrix in 2026 terms and kind of looking at the arguments presented. What can we learn? How should we analyze it now? And what was amazing out of this conversation is, before the actors came on set, the creators of the Matrix, they made everyone read 3 books. One of those books was Kevin Kelly's first book, written in the 90s, called Out of Control. Kevin Kelly was the founding editor of Wired. He's written many other books. He's absolutely fascinating, like one of the biggest influences on me ever. And what Kevin Kelly argued was that, and we talked about this earlier, as technology becomes more complex, it starts to resemble biology, and biology starts to resemble technology as it becomes more complex. And that fundamental thesis is actually the inspiration of the Matrix story. Most people think the story is, hey, the machines harvest our energy and they create the Matrix. Machines bad, humans good. And that's more or less what the first movie was on the Matrix. But if you look at the sum total of the trilogy, it's much more nuanced than that. By the end of the story, what happens is the humans and the machines make a deal. And the deal is the machines can harvest some amount of human embryos as energy, and the humans can live underground and take advantage of the technology they need to survive. And so it's actually a symbiosis between man and machine. That's the story of the Matrix. And what's personally humbling here is I discovered Kevin Kelly after I wrote Mycelium of Money. And in my head, I thought I was coming up with these biology and technology merging symbiosis ideas on my own. Then I go back and read Kevin Kelly, and 20 years before I discovered Bitcoin, he's already written all the same thesis. And so I just think it's amazing for Matrix fans to reevaluate it with that new lens. And also for anyone who thinks who attempts to think on the vanguard of culture and tries to come up with new ideas, we should humble ourselves and realize that most everything has already been discussed. If you want new ideas, go back into history and find forgotten ideas. They're probably still salient today.
I would want to point people to a YouTube series you might know. It's by Kirby Ferguson. It's called Everything is a Remix. I don't know if you know that, but I think you will like it. It's like there's like 2 or 3 videos, and it kind of revolves around this idea that nothing is actually really new, right? Like every new idea is basically a synthesis of things that existed before, your own assumptions or your own discoveries or whatever, and you package that in a certain way, and that is what eventually is presented as an idea or a concept, right? Like that could be a technology, but it could also be a movie or music or whatever. And it's very cool. Like you maybe know that the Disney movies have had like these frameworks like scenes, for example, right? Like you see someone, I don't know, walking through a door or jumping off something or whatever. And they just had the framework and they used it in many different movies. But then people also started doing that from other movies. So in this series, this guy shows that Quentin Tarantino basically stole the concept of a lot of scenes from many other movies that came before him, right? But because the context is different and the actors are different, etc., it doesn't really matter. It's actually more like an homage to what came before, right? It was that good that I used it again, basically. And I think what is so interesting with Bitcoin, it's kind of similar, right? Like Bitcoin itself, or like the combination of technologies and research, made it into this new thing. And obviously, Satoshi solved Byzantine general problem, right? Like there's something new added, but that is maybe 10, 15% or something, right? Like all the other stuff that came before it, he or they actually synthesized into what is this new thing. And I love that Bitcoin aligns so much with kind of like these guiding principles. Like it is not a random idea, right? It's not a random reason of existence, first, and second, it's also not random technology, right? It is a combination of things that people have looked at and tried to achieve for years already. And that's something that I really love, because it also shows you that there is a certain type of merit to it, or else it would have already died way before. Like I said before, like, do you know how many ideas there are released on the internet, right? Like that, just that point by itself. I hope maybe it triggers some Sentinel people to, spend a bit more time on it.
Yeah, I think what you just said is absolutely fascinating. I think it's a good critique of the previous common argument that the blockchain is the innovation here. Mm-hmm. And that is a false understanding of what Bitcoin is. People think, oh, the blockchain's new, and a blockchain in and of itself produces the properties that we like about Bitcoin. Yeah, the fact that it's hard to change and it's decentralized and double spend, all this stuff. No, not even close. Satoshi just built a Franken technology, to your point, combining previous technologies that have been out for a while in a new way. And he organized it in a way to solve a specific problem, which is a decentralized money. And a blockchain on itself cannot provide those things. And so it's really the constellation of technologies that allow the emergence of the values that we like out of Bitcoin. They're not inherent to any of those technology. It's a system that, properties emerge.
Fully agree. Did you know the longest running blockchain is actually something from 1995, and it's an ad. I don't know if it's in the classifieds ads in the New York Times, and it's just a hash. Did you know this or not?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah. So, you should look it up. It's published by Surety. It's a spin-off of Belcore, which I think is a very old, computer science company. So since 1995, they placed small classified ads in the New York Times containing the unique hash of the previous week's digital document seal. So whenever I hear a suit talk about, I love blockchain as the innovation, it actually shows us we still have an opportunity to front run them, by the way. Like they're not at the level, right? And I had American Hodl on, and he said, we're probably like 8 years ahead. And this is also why I think, Hall of TradFi is going to have their crazy NFT crypto degeneracy moment with tokenized stocks, right? I really think it's going to be fucking chaotic and will blow up a lot of stuff, to then eventually, realize that Bitcoin is the only thing they should be paying attention to. Yeah.
100%. I had a tweet when Trump was launching his stupid meme coins where Trump is trying to speed run TradFi through their shitcoining phase over the weekend.
Yeah,
he launches Trump coin, Melania coin, goes up, goes down. Everyone learns their lesson in 48 hours. Let's move on to Bitcoin.
Maybe it was a heroic action. I agree.
Not intentionally, but maybe served as a touch the stove moment for TradFi.
Yeah. So, maybe to wrap up, I think it was really nice to kind of explore this, right? Unpack this together. Is there anything from your journey where and maybe we talked about it, right? The acceptance of the suits, for example, but like, was there like an original idea you had that was really profound to you, but that actually changed later on, or you abandoned, or it had like a certain evolution, like something that you were wrong about, or maybe now even see in a different light that, actually taught you something?
Let's see. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that early on, let's say 2020 to 2024 period, we're going through the COVID era. At that point, I thought that Bitcoin would be like widely accepted by individuals because from my point of view, the debasement problem was so glaring, so obvious. There's no way out. And so Bitcoin's destiny felt predetermined to me at that point. And I still feel that way. But what I got wrong is I thought the individuals around the world, let's just say the Sentinels, now that we know more about that, I thought those folks would come to that conclusion much sooner. I did not expect retail adoption to slow down. I thought it was going to accelerate. That was wrong. I think the next thing I got wrong is I thought during the COVID period and even during this quote fourth turning we're in now, we're going to redo the geopolitical order. I think that's pretty obvious. I used to think that Bitcoin was for sure going to be global based money during this re-architecture period. And I still think it's possible today, but I think my timeline for when that is likely to occur pushed out quite a bit. And so I think what I got wrong is that I assumed other people would approach Bitcoin the same way I did. And I think people are way more diverse, and that's not the case, which means we should humble our expectations on when Bitcoin will be, quote, the base money of the world. I think it takes maybe a generation, maybe more, for that to be true. And so I think it just comes down to human nature. We have a hard time adopting new technology. We resist it. And at the same time, is Bitcoin ready for this geopolitical reshuffling? I don't know the answer to that question. It doesn't feel like it today. Counterpoint to all that, maybe considered doomer bear take, is that things do happen fast and at the last minute when we make changes. Right. On the heels of World War II, we came up with Bretton Woods, World Bank, NATO, IMF, redo the lines geopolitically. Like a lot of stuff happened in a really dense, stressful period. And so I'm not going to say we're not going to be base money in the next 5-10 years, but it appears much, much, much less likely than I once thought.
Yeah, I agree. And also, by the way, that's why your research also helped me a bit. I always thought, it would go way faster and that everyone is logical and rational and acting in their own self-interest and in their best interest. But apparently we have to have a bit more patience, as I would say with everything in life. All right, like maybe it's not even good if it goes too fast. So I think we'll both be following it with interest, right? Like I think you also want to see where this eventually ends up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's still nothing more interesting is that story. However, I do think the AI story is taking a lot of the juice off Bitcoin right now. For a long time, Bitcoin was the thing if you were trying to outperform the market. And what we've seen with AI is that's taking a lot of the shine away. And so we might need an AI pullback before Bitcoin regains its edge. Yet to be seen.
We'll see. Well, thanks a lot for your time and your insights. I hope people found it valuable. And yeah, man, let's stay in touch.
Awesome. Thanks, Bram.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode. Bye.